I am so pleased now to welcome our next guest who is going to share with us what's happening at BC Housing. Sara Goldvine is the Vice President of Communications and Public Affairs at BC Housing, and she's going to talk to us a little bit about the activities of BC Housing and how she sees that going forward. Sara, welcome.
I wanted just to take a few minutes to talk about BC Housing as an organization, in particular some of the work that we're doing to serve seniors and their communities across British Columbia. First, before we get underway, I just really wanted to recognize the land that we're on. So, of course, today we're doing the session from the lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. BC Housing, though, delivers our work on the territories of hundreds of First Nations and Indigenous communities across British Columbia. Of course, wearing orange today in recognition of Orange Shirt Day and the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. So I know that folks have been watching for some time. I'll try to keep it brief so we can get to questions. What I'm planning to speak, though, is just share a little bit about BC Housing, how we serve the community, and some overviews of some programs that you might want to be aware of. First, though, I thought it would be useful just to share with you the story of one person. This is Miss Kathleen, and she just celebrated her 104th birthday last December. She lives in our oldest market rental project, Cheshire Place in Chilliwack. She moved there a couple of years ago after living in Vancouver, and she lives with her daughter, her son-in-law, and their beloved dog. And interestingly, she's a retired teacher, actually. Things looked a lot different for her when she was a teacher. She took a one-year training program and then taught grades 1 through 9 in a one-room schoolhouse in rural Saskatchewan. And I thought it was interesting because she actually sent us a card, sent me a card, talking about the value of housing for her. And it's a beautiful card. And in this, she said, "I had not realized that I could be rewarded for growing old." And that just really resonated with me when I received that card, because I think it really speaks to the experience that we all want to have, is just to feel valued and like we have a place to belong. So it's not just about the buildings, right? It's about the people that live in them. Now, people hear about BC Housing and sometimes they're not aware of what we do. It's a lot. We're a Crown agency, which means that we report to the province of British Columbia. And really, we're here to address gaps across the entire housing system, specifically focused on those who are most in need. So right from emergency shelter through to rent assistance, and we even do some affordable home ownership. So we build new housing, we fund operators of housing, and then we also license builders, and we do research and other works like that. And part of what this means for us in terms of every day is that we actually build homes across the entire system. And I thought this slide would be useful because it really shows how housing is so complex. And it gives you an idea of the different types of housing that BC Housing provides. Sometimes folks are more familiar with what you see on the far end of the slide there around addressing homelessness, which is like shelters and housing with support services. We also, though, fund social housing, so that's often housing where people pay rent. That's about 30% of their income. We also provide rent subsidies in the private market. We provide affordable rental housing, and we do, as I mentioned, a bit of affordable home ownership. So there's a few programs that I thought would be useful to share with you today. And certainly what we'll do is we'll provide some links for folks in follow-up materials so that you can see more about these. You can also find out about all of these on our website at bchousing.org. I'll share a little bit about them. The first one is Shelter Aid for Elderly Renters, or SAFER. And this program is meant to help make rents more affordable for BC seniors who have low to moderate incomes. And it provides monthly cash payments to subsidized rents for residents who are 60 years of age or older. There's information on our website, including a calculator to learn if you can qualify. The other one I wanted to touch on briefly is called the BC Rebate for Accessible Home Adaptations, or RAHA. And this helps provide financial assistance to do renovations in the home for accessibility. So particularly for folks who are aging in place or maybe who have experienced an injury or disability, this program can help subsidize the cost of things like putting in different bathroom fixtures or addressing stairwells, things like that. Once again, there's information on our website on this one. The other one I thought I should highlight is called the Secondary Suite Incentive Program, and this one's brand new. You might have heard about it in the media recently. It's specifically for folks who want to invest in like a basement suite or perhaps build a laneway home. So if you're a homeowner, this can be a really great program. Right now, we're actually just in the process of sharing information on how to apply, and applications will open in the spring. You can get actually up to, you can get 50% of the cost of the renovations, up to $40,000 as part of a forgivable loan. So there's more information on our website on that one as well. Couple of other things to highlight for you. We know that for some folks, they're not looking to, they get to a point where they're not able to live in their own home anymore. And that's where something called senior supportive housing comes in. And this is housing where there's services provided to help people stay in their home. It's a little bit different than assisted living. So it's like a slightly lower level of support services than you would receive in assisted living, right? So it's lighter support services. There's also the Independent Living BC program, which is an assisted living program that provides housing with support services to seniors as well as folks with disabilities. Okay. A couple more things to touch on is just, we know that right now, in particular, the impacts of climate change can have a really extreme impact, and that people who are older, many seniors are at greater health risk from heat as well as from extreme smoke. So one thing that we're working really closely with is working with our nonprofit partners to be able to make sure that we're providing the right types of services and supports through things like air conditioning and air cleaning for folks who are living in our buildings. And then over the longer term, what we're working towards is building more resilient housing, making sure that the housing we're building is able to be comfortable for folks to live in over the longer term. I've talked a lot about programs. I thought I could make it real by talking about a couple of sites in our communities. Austin Harris Residence in Richmond. It's a really, really interesting site, and it's celebrated for its creative programming. In particular, the residents there get to engage in all of these different activities, from calligraphy classes to dancing, and they co-create the menu with staff. So it's a really great example of how housing can work together with culture to create a place of belonging. Another place that I thought would be interesting to highlight is Kikyelk, which is in Kamloops. And this one's really neat because it's an intergenerational facility where Indigenous youth, particularly Métis youth, live together with elders so that they can learn from each other and support each other in the community. So that's just two examples of the types of buildings that BC Housing provides across the province. All right, so ultimately just wanted to wrap by saying we know that housing is a system. So for many of you, you might be living in homes that you own, but you might be thinking about at some point, you might want to move or live somewhere else. And you probably can see in your communities the impacts of what happens when people can't afford housing. So really what we are trying to look for is how can we build a system where everybody has a place to call home. And to do that, what we need to be doing is providing the right types of adequate and attainable housing for everyone. We know that when one part of the system isn't working, it impacts all of us in community. It impacts our economy, it impacts our parks, it impacts our streets, it impacts our own ability to live well in community. And certainly, I would think for you as teachers, you can see how what can happen when one student in a classroom isn't feeling well supported. You can see that same impact. We see that same impact in community when people don't have access to housing. And for me, as the adult child of a teacher whose kids are in the educational system, I also can see the impact of education when it's done well. And I'd say housing is very similar in terms of having that ripple effect across community. So I guess my one ask to all of you, since I've got you on the line, would just be to help us by being advocates for and supporters for providing more housing for folks in communities, so that we can really create those communities where everyone can thrive. Happy to take any questions.
Oh, thank you very much, Sarah. That was a wonderful presentation. During our introduction to this segment, we talked a little bit about some of the nuances of housing versus a home. And I make special note of your choice to characterize some of the developments as a place where people can feel that they belong. Mm-hmm. I think that's a very effective and appropriate way to look at that, and really shines a light into what the purpose of all these projects are, which is to serve people. And I think you got off to a very strong start, I have to say, with your slide about Miss Kathleen, the retired teacher. Well done for that. So again, back to that theme of people serving people. Now, one of the things we talked about with Graham that is always pressing in our association, because we have people from all around BC, and you serve communities all around BC, and very often the places in the less populated regions, they're not getting the same airtime that you were hearing about downtown Vancouver or Metro Vancouver, so on. So I also saw an interesting stat that I thought was really interesting. We have people who moved up to the north or continued in the north because they loved that healthy outdoor lifestyle, but they actually are often at the risk of being most isolated and most unable to just do simple physical tasks if they, say, live in a area of their own home where there's no paved sidewalks and there's snow, so on. How are they supposed to get their daily exercise and so on? So the fact that BC Housing is addressing the needs of people who need to start moving into a little bit more dense accommodation, I think, is particularly important in communities like that. Can you maybe highlight some of the things that are happening regionally in BC?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad that you raised that. So BC Housing works with more than 800 nonprofits. And certainly often when you turn on the news, you're seeing stories about the downtown east side and some of our big housing projects. But we actually have more than, over 10 years, we're going to have more than 67,000 homes that are being built across British Columbia. And that's by 2031. And so the reality is that we do have housing right across British Columbia. So I just earlier this week came from visiting Nelson, Castlegar, Kelowna, and many of the providers actually traveled into those locations from smaller sites where they're providing housing units with 6, 10, 12, 20 homes. So certainly I would say one thing that we heard from them in particular with regards to folks who are aging in community is, as you mentioned, the interrelationship between housing and other services, right? So if you're living somewhere, you need to be able to have access to food. You need to be able to have access to grocery stores. You need to be able to have access to community and people to connect with. Healthcare, right? And so really what we try and do is we try and work with communities to take that integrated approach, which means working closely, for example, with health authorities to think about where are they seeing needs, how can we bring in healthcare, how can we bring in housing, thinking about where health centers are so that we can be locating it together. So I think it's absolutely right. And that's part of the reason why we provide such a range of housing programs. It's a lot to wrap your head around, but it's because the needs of communities are so different across the province. We actually have just under construction now, it's almost open actually, the most northernmost project in British Columbia, which is being built. It's almost right up in Alaska. And so we do have housing right across the province to be able to recognize that ultimately people want to live in their community, right?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that provides that continuity that people don't have to break down in terms of all their relationships to get their next housing situation, which is good. Now, you did mention our teachers are known for being good advocates for positive causes. And one of the things you sort of threw the doors open to is saying, you're glad to talk to us because it's good to have some voices in the conversation. We're really strongly advocating for strong funding of public housing. Can you talk a little bit about the prospects of stability of funding in this area? I think we've all sort of seen that yo-yo effect of a cause getting a lot of effort behind it, and then maybe something happens, then we forget about it next week. But this is a long-range issue. Is funding for this stable? What's your thought on that?
Yeah, so yes. I mean, here's the thing. I've worked in housing for quite a number of years, and usually our problem, for most of my career, my problem has been trying to get enough support for investment in housing. Could we have more? Of course, right? But I would say that actually the biggest challenge for us right now is not funding. We actually have $4 billion more just over the next three years in British Columbia, of which BC Housing is receiving $2.8 billion. So we do see investment in housing from all levels of government, in particular from the province at this point in time. That doesn't mean we're not hitting barriers, though, right? So what we're experiencing often in community is that change is challenging, particularly when you're talking about densification, when you're talking about bringing in residents who sometimes are facing very high levels of stigma and marginalization. So often those are the barriers that we're running into, more so than funding at this moment in time.
Yeah, as the old saying goes, you can't solve the problem just by throwing money at it. It needs to be applied, and you need the cooperation of everybody. I think that was a theme from our first segment with Graham Freeman, that the solution that really is going to involve participation by all the players. And so that will include the municipalities and people who live in the neighborhoods where you're identifying, hey, we can do something good here. You actually need people in that community to get behind the project and not be on the other side of that. Rental housing. Now, you're a provider of rental housing, and boy, you can't open the paper now in any community in BC without hearing some kind of story about rental housing. And, it's anecdotal, but, if you get enough anecdotes, you might come up with a fact. I'm personally hearing about a lot of people who have decided that they're going to invest in real estate, and they're just turning those units into Airbnbs, and it becomes a cash machine. And that home is now not really accessible to anybody who lives here. And I am not at all trying to get you to make a political statement, but is there some position that BC Housing has with regards to how our municipalities treat the rental market, and what do you think might help improve that situation?
Yeah, I mean, the reality of it is that we just need more housing across the entire system, right? So if someone like me isn't able to find housing, I'll displace someone else who then will displace someone else. So we often talk about how the housing system works, right? So if there's not enough rental for middle income folks, they'll move into basement suites. Then the people that might previously have rented basement suites end up, overcrowded, and the people who might previously have rented there end up on the street. So we really see that impact. And certainly what we're seeing is we do know that in particular, the population that's experiencing this quite significantly, there's several, but one of them is seniors, right? We're seeing real increases in seniors who previously could find affordable rentals, and now they just can't find them. So I would say that that's part of the reason why, at BC Housing, we're building, I mentioned previously, more than 67,000 units by 2031. That's a absolutely massive number. We're building more than the rest of the country combined. It's still not going to be enough though, right? Like BC Housing can't do it alone. Ultimately, what we need is more housing of all types across the system so that everybody can have a place to live, because we see the impacts when people can't find somewhere to live, right? You can see it. Just walk right out there, walk right out the front door of the building we're in. You can see folks right across the street, right, who don't have somewhere to go.
Yeah. Well, Sara Goldvine, I can't thank you enough for taking time to share these insights from your perspective at BC Housing. We really appreciate your presentation. We appreciate the pictures of the teachers, and we appreciate all the information we had. And I know later on when we're able to put this video up on our website, it'll be a resource that people can learn more about this important topic, and we'll make sure we have all the appropriate links there so they can learn more about your work. So thank you so much for coming in today.
Thanks so much for the opportunity. It's been great to be here.
Thanks very much, Sara.